Welcome to 914 Wired. I'm a little thrown off today because you don't have our music intro, but that that's
I
okay
know.
because
I apologize for
actually
that.
it
The
gives us
music will be
more
back.
time to talk to our fabulous guests. I'm Ardina Stewart along with Charlie Stern, Peter Moses, and I'm delighted to have my former colleague, Ken Rosato, who is Mr. Fabulous, but that's a whole other show. But Ken has his own podcast, and he's done a lot of research and a lot of just a lot of talk on congestion pricing. We also have Bill O'Reilly. Bill has an organization that has been on the show twice before. They were the advocates to stop the congestion pricing movement, and today they can applaud themselves because they, along with others, have done just that. So I guess we should probably open it up with Bill. Bill, what's the latest on the demise, or temporary demise, I should say, of congestion pricing?
And I've got to say I started working on this issue in I think in October of 21, and nobody in the world was interested except for Marsha Kramer at CBS and your show. And you were the first one to want guests on to talk about it, and it was an issue that was largely invisible at the time, so we really appreciate that. But we'll see. I mean, the equipment is up. Governor Hochul has said that it's being postponed indefinitely. Things can change, so we're going to have to work on the assumption that it could come back. But as of now, I mean, the governor laid out the economic hardships for people, so it's going to be difficult for her to reverse quickly. But in time, she could certainly do it. There are a lot of people that are very committed to congestion pricing. They've been, they're good people. They've got their point of view, and they've been working on it for decades. So, we expect that this might come back, but we'll see. We'll see
Let's
in
let's
time.
not let's not downplay the fact that the Rockland County executive has sued the city of New York. The governor of New Jersey has sued the city of New York, and the governor of Connecticut has sued the city of New York. That's playing a as large a role as any advocates for or against this from
But the
it being
whole,
stopped for now.
And,
yeah,
and if I may throw in, can I also throw in that it's all parties, Democrats and Republicans, screaming you can't do this. So this is sort of an all against New
and
York
Ken,
City
you and I
situation.
covered these stories on congestion. Well, not this story in particular, but we covered congestion pricing way back in the day when you and I worked together at EWN. So, so what is your
Yes.
take on how this has shifted, if it has at all, from the time that we covered to where we've arrived at now?
Well, let me just say that it's an honor to be on with all of you all because I appreciate the fact that you're all so informed on congestion pricing. I just did a show on WOR radio just May 12th on congestion pricing, and I interviewed seven different people, all the people who are doing the lawsuits, et cetera. And the funny thing about congestion pricing is back in 2007,
Right.
this was touted, this was flown as a possibility. So this is not something new. This is something that they've been talking about for the longest time. Anytime a politician sees a dollar sign, they salivate. It just becomes sort of they become monsters because all they see is votes, 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 votes. And this is speaking here as a guy who has politicians in my family. Okay. That's why I decided to join the dark side and be in the media to kind of keep them in balance. So when you see all the money that could be generated, well, of course, now it's a matter of selling it. And the idea that they brought this to the public with the concept that this will do everything in the whole world. No more pollution, no more congestion, and we're going to make billions of dollars. Unbelievable. And there'll be manna from heaven, and children will sing kumbaya and hold hands, and the money will just appear in people's pockets to pay 15 freaking dollars a day to get into a city that has
With Easy
potholes
Pass.
and crime. Yeah, with you. Yeah, you don't feel it right away with Easy
2250
Pass, right?
without. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly, exactly. So this is the obscenity. And by the way, let me just float this. How can you do two things at once? How can you raise the money to cover the deficit for the MTA and simultaneously not have congestion and not have pollution? Because if people avoid coming in, thus no pollution and no congestion, then you don't get the money. And if you get the money, then you still have the pollution and the congestion. So what have you solved? Ergo, it is a
Exactly.
money grab,
Exactly.
Yeah,
period.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, interestingly, for the last 20 or 30 years, and anybody can Google this to check, but the like civilian civilians driving cars into Manhattan for work or for tourist purposes, whatever, have been going down for 20 or 30 years. The reason that the congestion has gone up is because of Uber and Lyft cars principally. They've skyrocketed, and they were actually the ones that were going to benefit probably the most from this. And then the other thing is, of course, street furniture and bike lanes, the rest of it. They seemed, and I think there was some intention there to make the traffic worse in Manhattan, to shrink the roads in order to facilitate the
Charlie.
congestion pricing coming through. And they got busted because at the end of the day, this did nothing for the environment. What it did was moved particulate matter and other air pollution into other neighborhoods, mostly low-income neighborhoods, and they were rerouting truck traffic with, again, particulate matter into the South Bronx, which has the highest youth asthma rates in the country. So there was a lot of hype to this that wasn't true. And eventually they got caught, and Hochul had to capitulate. There's also a class action suit of small business owners that I'm working on that's out there as well. Peter mentioned the lawsuits. I think there's a total of 7 at this point.
I cannot top Ken Rosato's energy on this topic. It's impossible. Okay. But the only thing I can add to this, and did a little bit of background homework on the topic. They were talking about this during the Lindsay administration. And I even read somewhere in the 50s they started talking about congestion pricing as a concept. The politicians were into it. But at that time, the car companies had powerful lobbies, and they crushed it because not everybody in Queens had a car, and they wanted to sell them one. Times have completely changed. It looks to me, this looks like a terrible idea that has a intellectual underpinning to it. It's not a senseless idea, but it's a completely impracticable and undeliverable thing. And I have something even simpler than what Ken said, which is I use those subways. They smell like urine. I stand there. I see people jumping over the turnstiles. I can't
with impunity.
Yeah.
With impunity.
So I cannot rationalize a new system, a new multi-$100 million technological solution to solve the problem of bringing more revenue to the M.T.A. How about solve some of those more basic problems before you do all that? That's
4 to 700 million.
Let me say
4 to
something
700
else.
million a year.
Let me say something else. As an ultimate cynic, I think one of the reasons why they wanted to go forward with this is because of all the sunk costs they need to make back by instituting congestion pricing. Does that sound crazy to
Well,
Makes a lot of sense.
there's an eternal hole in the M.T.A. budget, and that's been going on for years. Despite the raise in fares, despite the change of management, the M.T.A. has always consistently mismanaged. So the fact that they wanted that.
Ardina, I'm sorry to step on you. Back in 2011, there was 1 year where they had a magical $1 billion surplus. Then by 2012, it was a $2 billion deficit, which I don't know what's worse. If you don't know where a surplus comes from, or you don't know where you lost $3 billion in a year, what kind of mismanagement? If you or I worked as accountants for a business and we suddenly misplaced $3 billion in a year, do you think we'd have a job?
Monty.
I think if you worked at Citibank, you would.
Look,
Yeah.
the M.T.A. budget is like 3-card Monty, and it's always been that way. They shift the money. I remember doing an interview this is eons ago, with an M.T.A. Official, and at the end of the interview, I said to him, where does the money go for the M.T.A.? You guys just raised the fares, so where's the money go? And I remember he looked at me and he rolled his eyes. There was no answer. He had no answer. And they consistently have had no answer. So this mythological congestion pricing that's supposed to raise money for the M.T.A. is just that. It is mythological.
Hey, Ardina and Ken, I'm sure in your time at ABC, you attended some M.T.A. board meetings or
in that little square room. Yes.
I mean, it was unbelievable.
Yep.
No one said anything about anything. It was just like,
what was amazing about
Brooklyn.
Those meetings at
But that's a good,
347?
Peter.
Yes, Charlie?
So my question is, you attended those meetings, you sort of know the character. I personally know one former M.T.A. board member. I don't have a real mind map for what these guys are like. But when I see them interviewed, I think one of them was on Marsha Kramer's show. You mentioned Marsha Kramer fairly recently. And I'm like, what planet is this guy living on? Like, why are they so disconnected from like the way an average person or even multiple standard deviations of average person.
I got to weigh in.
Issue.
I got to weigh in on this
far out
consistently. I covered as well as Ken a lot of M.T.A. board meetings at 347 Madison, and what always astounded me were the double park limousines on Madison Avenue that chauffeured the M.T.A. board members for not a brief period of time, but for a long period of time. Paul McCartney's now present wife was an M.T.A. board member. I mean, she came in with a $3,000 handbag. She came in with like $5,000 duds. She had no relationship to riding a bus or getting on the number one train, along with I would say 85% of the other board members. These are rich people, totally disconnected from the rank and file, that ride the buses, that ride the subways every day. And Charlie, to your point, you are right that they don't have a clue about what it is to ride the New York City subway.
So they have a romantic idea of what the public transit system is really like. That's problematical. But
they're
who appointed
political
them?
jobs,
Governors?
they're political positions.
Yes.
This is one reason why this
But
is so dysfunctional.
Here's the other part of it. It's not just the board members. It's the management of the M.T.A. It is one of them, and I see Bill shaking his head. Yes, it is an incredibly mismanaged agency to the point where no one can figure out any of the accounting, and I think that's done purposely. That it's so lacking opacity that no one, the $3 billion that Ken mentioned before, it's missing, and no one can figure out what it is.
That's right.
Bill?
That's right. It's exactly the right point. And 10 years ago, the New York Times did an expose, and I think you're all probably familiar with it. That a mile of subway track in New York City costs 7 times the second highest, most expensive city in the world, which is Paris.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. That was the next thing I was going to say. And that's why I can't deal with this situation, because you're going to create this you're like, they're physically going to create a moat out of a big piece of Manhattan to pay for something when it's like billions of dollars per mile to extend a subway.
And just think about the First Avenue subway. How's that going? Not to mention, listen, when London decided to impose congestion pricing, they spent 5 years and billions of sterling pounds fixing up their tube system. And to this day, London, which is comparably in terms of population with New York, they're a little higher. We're about 8.2 million. They're about 8.9 million, whatever. They charge less per ride than we do, yet we have a multi-billion-dollar deficit and they have a 700 million pound surplus. How come? And their tube is spotless. You don't have graffiti everywhere. You don't have urine smell everywhere. Right. How come?
And they have candy machines everywhere.
But Ken, you're talking about London Underground right now?
Yes.
Okay. So the only thing with London Underground is my recollection, I made a visit there a few years ago, is it's based on distance, so you not everybody pays the same fare. Right. So maybe, and I don't know, you guys probably know better than me, is there some component of congestion pricing in their pricing? Like, does the ticket price change depending upon the time of day that you buy it?
Yeah. Oh, yes. In London, and at night it's free, and weekends are free. Yeah.
Okay. So then there is
the average price is still less than us.
I simply want to give a nod to the notion that the economic concept of congestion pricing is not irrational, but you gotta go about it right. And this was the wrong way to go about it.
If you take an LIRR train or you take a Metro North train in, depending on your distance, you pay a different amount. Why not do the same thing with the subway? If you're going to ride from Brooklyn all the way to the Bronx, why should you pay $2.90 like somebody who's just going 2 stops in Manhattan?
Right. And
That-
Ken,
that-
they
that's
do
actually
have
come
time-
up before.
I can answer
and they do
that.
have time of day pricing because there's peak and off peak. So there are some things you can do.
But I have an answer to that point, Ken. And my point is that the subway, as it's designed with the 5 boroughs, you take the Bronx apart from all the other boroughs, the poorest borough, and you're going to penalize people who are living in poverty to begin with if they have to go to Brooklyn to work. That doesn't sound fair to me.
Yeah.
But
The idea's
honestly,
come
though,
up a few times.
many people who are in that socioeconomic situation get either free or they get a little deal with their fares. The kids don't have to pay because they get the school passes. So I agree with you that the Bronx is definitely the poorest borough and definitely has the worst rates. And you got the highways running through and the higher asthma rates. I agree with you 100% on all of that. But there's got to be a better solution than saying to people who do not take the subways, who come in from the outer boroughs, blue collar cops, firefighters, teachers who have to come in at 6 a.m. and don't have access to good mass transit, that they now have to pay $15 a day. That just doesn't make sense.
It
And
doesn't.
Ken, I think you gave the answer before, Ken, which was collect the fares, collect the tolls. They're leaving $700 million a year on the table, which is almost enough for what they're doing. For those who don't know, is they wanted to borrow $1 billion. They wanted to get $1 billion in revenue each year, and with that, they would float $15 billion in bonds.
Right.
And if they just collected the fares, they'd be most of the way there. There's plenty of extra money. They don't need something else. They need better management is the whole thing. I've got to just add one thing. I had a show in Westchester for about 5 years with the late Assemblyman Richard Brodsky, who was a progressive and a liberal. And I just got to say that Richard was largely, or at least one of the reasons why congestion pricing didn't go through in '07. And his argument always, we were right and left, but his was that the tax is so regressive. And I'm glad Peter brought the outline subway stops, because as you go further out, you're going into more low-income areas in all the boroughs. But it's a regressive tax. Wealthy people can afford it. Wealthy people can jump into Ubers. The rest of it is the poor guy that's trying to get to work in the middle of the night or elsewhere that really gets tagged.
Going. Yeah,
Look at Staten Island. Look, I'm sorry, Ardeen, just to throw that out there. Look at the Staten Island people who have Staten Island Rapid Transit, which I put in quotes, rapid transit. I have friends in Tottenville, and they say, really? Rapid transit? It takes me 6 days to get into Manhattan. So, those are the people who have to drive, and they're going to get totally screwed by this whole concept.
But Bill,
So I guess
go ahead, Charlie.
Go ahead. Well, since Bill was, kind of talking about the political layer of this thing, I guess you're the right guy to ask. How do you get a governor to put the stop on something this massive at such a late hour? I would really like to know how those conversations happen.
And
Who
Peter's correct,
calls who? No, who
Yep.
calls who, Bill? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You're an experienced columnist, political advisor. You know this world. How did it unfold?
You never know that they're going to break, but you put on as much pressure as humanly possible. And this issue really exploded starting around 6 months ago. And the lawsuits definitely, Peter, had a lot to do with it, because those could have gone on for a long, long time. But the pressure just got too great. And we didn't know that this was coming down. I went to bed and woke up, and it was a totally different environment. Governor Hochul announced this overnight. A lot of it, I think, was the small business owners in Chinatown, on the Lower East Side, other areas that were apolitical. These are not people, they're not partisans, they're not apparatchiks. These were real people. I did press conferences in Chinatown. They're people who only spoke Mandarin. They weren't tied into the system. And they were absolutely convinced that their businesses were going down, because if you look at Chinatown now or Lower East Side, every third store is wiped out. They don't need to lose a ton of money to go under. Their margins are like 4 or 5%. That's what they make. They lose a little bit of foot traffic and they're dead. And I think, to her credit, Hochul finally heard that. What was interesting was that she didn't call, like Pete Harcum, for example, who's been a champion of congestion pricing. I should note that I'm working against him for Gina Arena this year. But she didn't call the Pete Harkums of the world. She didn't tell them she was going to do this because she didn't want to hear it. She didn't want to get yelled at. She didn't want the rest of it. She just announced it by video, got on a plane, and went to Washington for another meeting. And but God bless her that she did it, because it got pretty close.
Is she doing this? Is she going to reverse it? Is she going to reverse it after Election Day in November?
It's very possible. Oh, I'm sorry. I left out the very important point was that Hakeem Jeffries and the Democrats. There are critical congressional races in New York, even in our area.
Right.
Mike Lawler is running for re-election. You got Marcus Molinaro. You got 2 Long Island seats. Congestion pricing is big in those areas, and so the Democratic Party was concerned that this could have a bad effect on those elections. So that was
But also
certainly part of our
subway
thinking
crime.
as well.
Somebody had whispered in her
minority
ear
leader.
about, look, you know,
Right.
if you advocate for congestion pricing,
Right.
and you're going to ask people to jump on a train, and all of a sudden there's a spike in muggings and robberies, it's gonna look worse for her.
That's right. That's right. And which is why I think it's difficult for her to bring it back right away anyway, because she laid herself out there so thinly on the economics. I can't do this to people. It's a straw that will break their back. This will slow. The other point, which we made a lot, our organization made a lot, was that this was passed in 2019. It was done during a budget negotiation, so there was really no public input. It was like one of those middle of the night things that Andrew Cuomo did. But that was 2019. It was pre-COVID. The city has been trying to help recover the exact area that's being affected that is being affected by congestion pricing. 60th Street and below has never been the same. We're losing hundreds of dollars in real estate tax revenue, in other tax revenues. So we're trying to revive this area while at the same time they were going to put up a paywall to enter it, which is just crazy. Like how could you say, you know, the city and state are working to revive? They had a million press releases saying it. We're reviving downtown, but you got to pay $22.50 with that Easy Pass to get there. So it just didn't make any sense.
If you look, Bill, if you look at what the governor was saying, Governor Hochul, exactly a year ago, June of 2023, she sang the praises of congestion pricing like it was manna from heaven. This was just the most glorious thing. It's going to solve every issue in the world. Did she not even look at a study? There's a traffic company that I interviewed who said that one of their studies shows if they implemented congestion pricing, you would have ripple effects 40 miles in every direction, and that mass transit coming in, LIRR and Metro North, cannot handle the 150, 200,000 people, not to mention the money that you would lose coming over the bridges. That money would impact Port Authority. Everybody gets impacted. You're just shifting the money.
And prices would go up because shipping costs, because for people living in Manhattan, because the
Ripple
trucks
effect.
coming in would have to pay an inflated fee. And let's face facts here. The last governor in New York State, because Cuomo wasn't going to do this during his tenure, the last governor with the power to have enacted that, and you said it went back to the 60s, was Nelson Rockefeller. And he didn't do it.
And he didn't do it. But Hochul read those studies, Ken. She must have. And her people knew what they were getting into. And for this thing, it's just such a colossal thing to change at the last second. I mean, the sensors are already up on the poles on 60th Street.
$500 million.
I've seen them. $500 million has already been committed. A whole bunch of IT vendors, a whole bunch of programming has already gone on. And it's like, you know, it would be like a rocket ship on the launch pad and somebody says, nope, the program's off.
Yeah.
Aren't you
They
aren't you
got out
looking
ahead of their
forward-
voters. Yeah.
If they end up never doing this, aren't you looking forward to the hearings and see who might or might not go to jail? Because that could be a lot of fun.
You just made my day on that one, Peter.
That's right, Ken. We wish we were back at the ranch, right?
Right, exactly.
Well,
Wasted
there
how
were-
much? Yeah.
There was a night last week, or I think it was last week, when the governor's phone rang and someone on the other end said, "Governor, it's time."
Yeah.
Was it Hakeem Jeffries? Was it the head of the state Democratic Party? I don't know who.
Was
We'll
it the
never
White
know.
House?
Now.
It could have been. It could have been because somebody might have said, "You know what? We don't want to lose that seat in Westchester. That's not a definite."
Yeah.
So
You know,
Who knows?
One point is that I mentioned before that this went through during the budget process, which used to be for budget items. And Andrew Cuomo, more than anybody else, started rolling legislation into the budget. If it could be an unpopular vote or the rest of it, he would stick it in there. So if you don't want, if you vote no, you're voting against school funding, you're voting against, saving bunny rabbits, you're saving all, healthcare senior programs. So they kind of set you up that you have to vote for the budget, and they stick this thing in there. But what happened was the New York government got out ahead of its constituents. There was never a public debate on this. It went back and forth in 2007, but in recent times, there was never that back and forth and back and forth and back and forth in the editorial boards. It just suddenly showed up in the middle of the night, and I don't think anybody noticed it until 6 months ago.
This
the average person?
This has been 25 minutes of vehement agreement that congestion pricing.
I thought three of you were in favor when I came in.
was in favor.
Nobody likes it. Nobody
I knew you
likes
weren't,
it.
Ardina.
So,
I knew that.
So I want to thank my colleagues Peter and Ardina and our guests William F.B. O'Reilly, a.k.a. Bill O'Reilly, and Ken Rosato for coming on the show to kind of explain the backstory of this unbelievable congestion pricing, which we hope will go away and stay away for a very long time, and talking about the implications of it. Like, follow, subscribe, everybody. You know what to do. This has been 914 Wired. Thank you again.
Thanks, Charlie.